we're doing it. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We are live. Can anyone
confirm?
Live.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So this is why you don't do live events, right? Yay. Okay, people see us. Yay. I'm so excited. So I apologize for that. We had some Wi-Fi and some streaming key issues. And of course, like my heart's beating a billion miles an hour trying to get it fixed so I can talk to Cyndi and see your presentation so you all can see it. So I apologize for the delay. If you have time, Cyndi, if we have to go over a few more minutes, are you okay with that? Do you have any pressing meetings right away?
I do, but I mean, don't tell my department, but I can be late to my staff meeting.
All right, you heard that first here, staff. Stay tuned, but we'll get through the introduction real quick so she can go straight on to her presentation. So hopefully we don't mess anyone's schedules up. But so sorry, staff, if I'm keeping her from doling out all your work. So maybe they like that. I can keep you a little longer. All right, so welcome everyone to our June Accessibility Talk. If you haven't joined us before, Accessibility Talks or Ally Talks is an informal monthly meetup where we invite an accessibility professional to speak on a topic of their choice and allow for some Q&A time at the end of their presentation. In this particular case, we may have less of that. So make sure you post on Twitter with the hashtag A11yTalks, A11yTalks, or post it to the right, the left, one of those ways in the chat box if you're watching us live. Just a quick reminder, AbleGamers seeks to provide a friendly and safe environment, and we encourage people to engage in productive dialogue. So that enables us to share and learn with each other in an atmosphere of respect. So we have a code of conduct. We'll link to that. Just know that you are also, as a participant, part of the code of conduct, but also the hosts and the speakers as well. So please keep it nice and for all your Q&A, your questions and all that. So moving on, my name is Carrie Fisher. I'm your host today. You can blame me for all the gremlins in the internet and for the delay, so I apologize again for that. I'm an accessibility consultant and trainer who sometimes is in the hot seat presenting content, but not today. Today we are speaking with Dr. Cyndi Wiley and on the topic of accessible game design. Cyndi works as a digital accessibility coordinator at Iowa State University, which sounds like a pretty awesome gig. But what I really want to know is it true you taught puppies how to play Tetris?
The puppies actually taught themselves and ended up in the Tetris configuration all by themselves. They were only a few weeks old. It was amazing. So yes.
That's awesome. And we'll post a link to that for anyone who missed that on Twitter. It was adorable. And last count, it had almost 200 likes. So like it again, it's pretty cool. All right, well, no enough chit chat. Let's jump right into it. So I'm really excited to hear this presentation. So take it away, Cyndi.
Thank you. I'm gonna switch to sharing my screen and turn off my camera for just a minute while I play the slideshow. I know that a lot of you will have to leave right at 2 o'clock, which is totally understandable. So no worries, this will be recorded. So let me know, Carrie, you can see my screen, yes?
Yep, looks good to me.
Perfect. So thank you. I'm so glad to be here today. And thanks to the organizers of Ally Talks for the invite and for calling me a professional. That's really kind of you. And to those tuning in and waiting around as we work out the tech glitches. So my name is Cyndi Wiley, as Carrie said, and I work as the Digital Accessibility Coordinator at Iowa State University in lovely Ames, Iowa. I began my career in the 90s in St. Louis, Missouri, working as a graphic designer and eventually creative director, running a business, moving to Iowa, going back to school, becoming a professor of art and design, and developing a deep love of cats. My partner, Jennifer, and I have 4 kitty cats now and 2 dogs, a boxer and the rescue mastiff that had surprised us with a lot of babies. So I'd like to begin this event with a land acknowledgement. Iowa State University is located on the ancestral lands and territory of the WICAG or Iowa Nation. The United States obtained the land from the Meskwaki and Sauk nations in the Treaty of 1842. We wish to recognize our obligations to this land and to the people who took care of it, as well as to the 17,000 Native people who live in Iowa today. The title of this presentation, Accessible Game Design, It's 2.1 Fun, is a reference to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, version 2.1. I'm going to spend about half of the time on the why portion of why do we need to test games for accessibility, and the other half of the time on how to get started testing games for accessibility. I'm guessing as to the audience, and I'm guessing that many of you have some experience with accessibility testing, and some may not have as much experience and are here to learn. There are also some experts in the audience that do a lot of accessibility consulting as well, so it's a good mix. The images on the slide are from our digital accessibility lab at Iowa State with an Xbox, the Xbox adaptive controller, and the Logitech adaptive gaming kit. The small items are called switch controls and are connected to the larger white adaptive Xbox controller. Each switch acts as a button that provides the same exact functionality as the traditional controllers. Traditional controllers assume you have 2 arms, 2 hands with fingers that are fully functional. They are supposed to work for both left and right-handed people, with varying success and failure if you are not a mainstream right-hander. Switch controls allow gamers with mobility impairments and other disabilities to mount them on wheelchairs, the floor, the side of a table, whatever configuration works for each individual. Last year, I applied and received $25,000 from Iowa State to start the Digital Accessibility Lab with assistive technology equipment and software. My department, Information Technology Services, also sponsored the furniture, 2 graduate assistants, and 4 hourly student workers, all of whom have significantly contributed to the work of digital accessibility along with me and putting up with me and my bad jokes and my constant talk about cats. We also worked with facilities and planning management to make the space ADA compliant. So we have 5 stations, all with desks that are electric height adjustable, flexible seating, to not only make it ADA compliant, but try to go above and beyond just the minimum requirements. The lab is where we can test games for accessibility and work on game design and development. We have an Xbox console and an MSI gaming computer with VR and eye tracking, the tap keyboard, which is in one of the pictures there where you wear as rings, and you tap certain combinations with your fingers to actually type, and on your thumb, it has a fully functional mouse. It was developed for gaming, but is also a good assistive technology for some. My hand is shown in the picture, so I am a mainstream right-hander, but there are also lefties working in the lab as well. We have assistive technology that students can use to complete their coursework, like a large desktop magnifier, a braille display, various screen readers, screen magnifiers, large monitors, laptops, and desktop computers loaded with software. There are at least 20 faculty people at Iowa State teaching with games, designing games, developing their own games, and we have about 500 esports players that are organized on teams through rec services. We are opening a new 40-station esports lab in a rehabbed and reconfigured recreation center, and there will be gaming stations in our brand new Student Innovation Center building. Educating yourself is important to try and understand people that are different from you. Part of educating yourself on relevant issues is to find people that are different than you and start a conversation. At the very least, follow people on social media that are different than you and are working on different things. The students and I host many different groups visiting the lab to demonstrate the capabilities of the tech, but also to have conversations. The majority of us identify as having at least one disability. Someone, pardon me, I follow on Twitter and who is also very active on YouTube is Christopher Hills. His Twitter handle is @the_switchmaster, and he is a Switch accessibility and video production engineer based in Australia. He owns a company named Hands Optional. He uses Switch controls on his wheelchair, they're behind his head, to control his computer, edit video, play games, type emails, and basically fully control his computer without a keyboard or a mouse. These types of controls are also what Stephen Hawking used to deliver lectures, communicate with others, write books, and make guest appearances on the Big Bang Theory show. He had a sensor that responded when he moved his cheek, and he was fully able to control his computer in that way. He could move the cursor, type, set his text-to-speech software to read aloud what he typed so that he could communicate through voice, albeit a computer voice. Another person I follow goes by the gamer tag of Broly Legs. He is a top-ranked professional esports player in the game Street Fighter and uses a traditional controller rather than any adaptive controls or switch controls. He does operate his wheelchair with switch controls though, but he operates the game controller using his hands and his face. I need to thank the Twitter sphere for people reaching out and sending others for me to follow about games and accessibility. I'll make sure to pass along these slides so that you have the resources I will cover throughout and the links. The 3 accessible game design resources I reference a ton are mostly from AbleGamers, Can I Play That, and the Inclusive Tech Lab at Microsoft. Of course, there are many, many more out there doing good work to promote game accessibility. And also through Twitter is how I got in touch with Carrie. I saw the Alley Cats shirt, squealed a little, promptly ordered a couple, and DM'd her, direct messaged, to ask if our team at Iowa State could use the likenesses of the Alley Cats to design and develop a game that would be distributed for free as a learning tool for digital accessibility. And amazingly, she said yes, after she talked to some others, of course, that are involved with the Alley Cats. So we are working on that game right now, and we'll be throwing it out there for playtesting sometime in the future. So watch our Twitters for that in the coming months. I do want to say some things about games and let you know that I don't know everything, and I don't play all the games because there are millions of them. And I may miss something you feel is important. I am open to feedback. One of the local TV channels here in Iowa always says after they air an editorial that they welcome responsible replies. So I welcome responsible replies. I've included my social media handle for Twitter @Cyndi Wiley on the slides. And you can also find me on other socials and by visiting my website, cindywiley.com. There is one question I get asked when I am talking about digital accessibility and games, and that is, why games? Why do you have games in this lab? What does this have to do with accessibility? Okay, so that was a series of questions. There's 3 questions in there. I also want to add to those questions things that we don't often think about or openly ask and present those as examples of privilege. There exists a severe lack of representation or representing through negative stereotypes of people of color. My challenge for myself and to you is to really do the work to educate ourselves about power, privilege, and racial inequities, and to think about what the lack of representation means and be more inclusive in our work. The last part of that series of questions is, what do games have to do with accessibility? That question plays into the myth that disabled people don't or can't play games and is based on incorrect assumptions. Again, How can we work to be more inclusive? I want to acknowledge that yes, there are problems and issues with some games. I also want to acknowledge that while I do not know everything, the lens I approach game design and digital accessibility is as a queer white person with much unearned skin color privilege. I don't fit typical gender identity norms, and there are a lot of games out there that hypersexualize women. I'm an academic, I research, I read, I gather data, I talk to people, and I still don't know everything, and I will never know everything. It's important to me to actively hire people who are different than me and have different experiences. People with disabilities or disabled people, whether you use people first or identity first language, and underrepresented people. When I was hiring for the lab, I contacted the student accessibility services at Iowa State and also the ADA student group with the job postings. I listed some of the needed assistive tech knowledge as a bonus for each position. I did not and would never ask the students to self-identify with a disability, but I always choose to share mine. I'm open and out about many things I find important to move forward in this work. And we are also working closely with Iowa Vocational Rehab, Department for the Blind, Association of the Deaf, Department of Human Rights, as well as the other Iowa Regents institutions. So whatever you're thinking about games, there are a ton of data supporting the importance and connection of games to learning and socialization. Some of us may think games are a waste of time and might tell our kids to stop spending so much time playing Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege, or even Animal Crossing New Horizons, which is my new summer favorite, by the way. On Monday, June 15th, the FDA approved a video game called Endeavor RX for use in treating kids with ADHD. You have to get a prescription for the game and work with your healthcare provider, but this is unprecedented and new territory for the possibility of games and accessibility to not just waste time, which I freely admit I play a lot of games and always call it research when sometimes I am just wasting time, but also as a designer, an accessibility person, I do need to play a bunch of games and experience them. So remember Pokemon Go? It was all the rage in 2016, and you would see crowds of people around certain areas. Well, now it is more accessible because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and you don't have to leave your house to play, and you can play at a greater distance from others. It's perfect. The picture on the slide may or not be me on my motorcycle playing. I was fully stopped, by the way, and in a parking lot out of traffic if that was me. Don't text and drive or play Pokemon while in motion. That's my public service announcement. So while I'm not going to really talk about how to start designing a game in detail, I will talk about basics of how to start testing games for accessibility. There are not really good ways to auto test like there is to get started with web design. You really have to manually test, which means you have to play the games you are testing. It's helpful if you can play through a game, but bear in mind the length of time it might take to do that. So some games might take 50, 60 hours of play to finish, like Skyrim or Borderlands. And some are perpetual, infinite games like Animal Crossing, where you can play every day. You have to figure out the balance, and when you're starting out, stick to the basics, which I will cover. And one of those basics is the game design document, or GDD for short. It should be the first step in the entire process. Usually we start with a one-page synopsis and concept, then move on to a longer, more detailed plan. The game design document becomes a working, living plan that should include accessibility, user testing, play testing, budget, character development, game mechanics, which are how the game functions, the rules, the player interactions, and so forth, navigation, art concepts, story, software, code, and the people needed to create those different aspects. This is where you work with a team and make sure you are including people with disabilities all along the way from the beginning to the end. We need to be in the process from the very beginning. There's a saying in the community that you may have noticed in one of my previous slides that we have posted in our lab that is nothing about us without us. The first thing on my mind in the process is, especially if it's a video game, is always digital accessibility. Designing with accessibility in mind is the absolute key at the very beginning of the concept stage before you produce anything. We want games to be born accessible, just as we do all screen-based products like websites, apps, communications, and digital course content. While there are different considerations for building games with accessibility in mind in each stage of game design, some of you might just be interested in the testing part. For those in higher education like me, a department might ask you for your expertise when they are designing a game and want to make sure it's accessible. This is often where I come in at Iowa State, and it's really the ideal situation because it says that your colleague already knows something about digital accessibility, mainly that the need exists, and they've reached out to you for expertise. And hopefully they haven't started designing anything yet. Our lab is being included on grant requests for several faculty that are designing and building games, which is very exciting to me. A good basic resource to familiarize yourself with the process of video game design is a book called Video Game Design: Principles and Practices from the Ground Up by Michael Salmond. I use this book in classes to teach students basics of the entire process of game design and where to emphasize and add accessibility into the process. That is one area where this type of resource is weaker. There's not enough content on digital accessibility included. However, it does have many examples of games on its companion website, interviews with game studios, case studies, and a pretty thorough overview. So, can you apply the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG? Can you apply those and use them in game design? I say absolutely. All of our game testing lines up with WCAG. However, there are some specific things that need to happen in the game context for that alignment. When we start testing games for digital accessibility, there are some other resources that aren't so neatly compiled all in one place, like a textbook. That is also something that the lab is working on, the continued development of resources and the finding of resources already out there. So the best resource, the best go-to for this type of work is WCAG 2.1, particularly for its additional incorporation of mobile device success criteria. More specifically, accessible game design should also align with the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, or the CVAA. If you know WCAG or you know of WCAG, you can begin to check a game, and you really need to read the CVAA in addition, or read the highlights. But you have to play through a game, at least enough of it to be able to line up the standards. Your audience for accessible game design will be varied, just like it is for web design, even within the main categories of motor, cognitive, vision, hearing, and speech impairments. The most reported issues, according to several sources, are ability to remap controls per game, color blindness, resizing of text, and subtitle presentation. All of these issues are included and covered by the WCAG guidelines. If you think about what experiences are important to the game you are playing and testing, you can then apply the POUR principles. We already use the POUR principles for web design and document design, and we can also use them in game design. For me, it's a way to simplify WCAG. The principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Using design patterns such as these that are developed by accessible.games, powered by AbleGamers, can help when assessing the POUR principles. They have a physical card pack that I have found extremely helpful to just have around at all times as a tactile reference and for discussion points. The first part of the core principles is perceivable. So perceivable is information and user interface components that must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive. This means that users must be able to perceive the information being presented. It can't be invisible to all of their senses. So how does this apply to a game? The player should be able to map the controls to their own preferences and be able to assign switch controls. So you can assign buttons to actions and do something different than the defaults. Haptics like vibration in the controls are important for people in noisy environments, deaf, hard of hearing, and visual impairments to indicate feedback for player options and actions. An example of this is when an enemy is sneaking up and there might be audio of grass rustling or footsteps like in Fortnite. A deaf or hard of hearing person needs additional haptic feedback like the controller vibrating to know that there's something that needs attention in the game or to be aware that something is coming. The same input methods should be consistent throughout the game to ensure playability and ease of use. Here's an example of a controller map. This one's from Minecraft for Xbox. And it's an example of how to make something more perceivable in a game. If you can customize these controls and assign them to different things, even a different controller altogether, like a joystick. And also on a touch screen, this is where WICAG 2.1 comes in on mobile. Things like Minecraft and Fortnite will also have a motion ring on a touch screen so that you can tell where your player is. The next one is operable. Operable means that user interface components and navigation must be operable. This means that users must be able to actually operate the interface. The interface cannot require interaction that a user can't perform. More specifically, this applies to the customizability of user interface components where players can resize or rearrange for better use. A particular player can reduce the amount of information to reduce cognitive load. Generally, a player can customize to suit their own style of play. Captions are important to a game being operable. If it is voice or sound only, that is not going to be accessible. And you need to be able to save these settings for the next time that you play. An example of operable: many games use a heads-up display or HUD. In Animal Crossing: New Horizons on the Nintendo Switch, which is the picture on the right, I can turn the world map, which is my own tropical island, on or off of my main display. Sometimes it's helpful to see where I'm at, sometimes it's in the way. If I'm not playing on a larger screen and just playing on the Nintendo Switch's screen, it's smaller and has some touch capability. And I want to keep those settings for the next time I play so I don't have to redo everything. Other games have different amounts of complexity to their heads-up displays and should include the ability for customization to keep it accessible. Understandable. Information and the operation of user interface must be understandable. This means that users must be able to understand the information as well as the operation of the user interface. The content or operation cannot be beyond their understanding. So applying this to games, some games are not suitable for all players. The game rating system is fairly good in indicating types of content and age appropriateness, but where it falls a bit short is when a game might contain strong emotional content. There are many reasons for players wanting to avoid this. For instance, a surprise might be a trigger for someone. A horror game like Five Nights at Freddy's, especially the VR version, can be very jolting with the jump scares. Some games need to have different modes for easy, intermediate, and difficult. It depends on the game, and sometimes it's a creative decision by the game designers. However, this creative decision should not supersede accessibility. So an example of understandable, again, from Animal Crossing, I said it was my summer favorite, where you can confirm or cancel something. So this is pulling up in text, which I prefer because I can turn the sound completely off and it's accessible, and I can confirm I have a way back. The last principle is robust. The content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, which are and include assistive technologies. This means that users must be able to access the content as technologies advance. As the technologies and user agents evolve, the content should remain accessible. And how this applies to games: if a player needs to enter text, a physical keyboard should not have to be used. This goes back to the use of switch controls or other types of assistive technologies. And I should probably say that the Nintendo Switch is a console device and not at all related to switch controls. They are different things. A player could use their voice to enter text. Examples of this are Xbox has ease of access options where players can activate speech to text for games. Some games will support this feature natively. I prefer the setup so that my voice doesn't have to communicate, but my voice enters text to communicate in the text chats through my headset's microphone. This helps me maintain my anonymity and not be flamed for being a woman in some games. It also helps me communicate quickly and not have to type. When I'm playing Overwatch, which is a real-time strategy game, or RTS, I can choose through the message wheel, which is the picture on the right, how I want to communicate with my teammates. The poor principles are just the basics, and we could go very complex and look at very specific examples that might need some discernment of where they fit within WCAG and line up with poor. In summary, keeping accessibility in mind, involving people with disabilities every step of the way, including the design process, should be an iterative back and forth conversation between design, testing, revisions, and finally development. The game design document will provide a good roadmap and hopefully eliminate scope creep in the process. And if you're not sure of something, consult a professional. I've included some in the resources that will be at the very end of the slides that the link will be sent out. And when you get the link to download the presentation, there will be other references, further resources, standard industry design, game design software and tools, and a short glossary of popular game lingo. So I want to, since we are at the end, close to the end of our time, I want to open it up for just probably time for a couple of questions. I do have time that I can stick around a little bit. So if you have questions, let's switch over to that.
That is amazing. Yeah. And I guess it helps that you're the boss, right? You can be late to your meeting.
I'm the boss of myself. Yes.
Good. Good to hear. Do you want to share your video?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to double check. We have had a lot of really great questions. Okay. There you are. You're in focus. So I'm going to start out with Imelda's question because I caught up on all the chatter. It was pretty hilarious. Yeah, the cats eat the cords to the interwebs. So
they did. Totally did. Yeah.
Those darn alley cats. So Imelda March asks, does Cyndi work with any game designers for testing and planning?
I do. So the advantage of being on campus at Iowa State is there are a ton of resources. There's a student game development club. The College of Design is what I'm connected to as well from my being an alum myself. That's where I went to graduate school. So yes. And then there's people that randomly I know in industries, like through Twitter usually, and then through like Twitch or Discord or some of the other networks.
Okay, so we can find you on those other platforms as well.
Yes, and my alter ego is Dr. Meowface. So if it's not at Cyndi Wiley, it'll be Dr. Meowface.
That's very professional of you.
Exactly, that you were so kind to call me professional.
That's really hilarious. All right, so I have a couple more questions that came in through Slack. So, what inclusive hiring practices work for you that best invite diverse candidates?
That's a great question. So this is something that we are, as a department, tackling in our departmental culture. So how do we get across that we are building a culture of inclusion? And part of that is we formed an advisory council. Our CIO formed an advisory council that I co-lead with Jeff Sorensen here at Iowa State, where we read White Fragility, that book, and 35 Dumb Things Well-Intended People Say, and we had discussions. And so we are preparing to take the next steps. Part of that is being more inclusive in our job postings with verbiage. What I have found is reaching out personally to people and saying, hey, I have this position open. It requires these skills. Please send this out to your group. And that has worked really well. But to use inclusive language is very important, and to keep it open-ended.
Yeah, those are some really great points for sure. I think that's especially pertinent in today's world, right? So I'm glad to hear that you're doing some more on that front. That's pretty awesome. All right, I have one more question that I know came in, but I encourage anyone to post, again, if you're watching live, post over there in the chat box, or A11yTalks on Twitter. So the other question I have here is, so you presumably, Cyndi said that there are no good programs to test games. So are there any, even if they're not good, like a good first start or an intro?
You know, that's a good question that I do not know if there is something out there that someone's using with some success. Let me know. That's where I freely admit I don't know everything, and I prefer to manually test games. When we're testing for web design and document design, we can always start with some automated tool that'll help us kind of get going, and then we also do need to manually test. Games are so complex and different and varied that I would say if there's something at the code level, that could be a start, and there may be stuff out there. So I'm curious if the community has any recommendations. Send them my way, please.
Yeah, those are great questions, and we see that Imelda is now following you. So if she needs more information about that, or other people do, follow Cyndi on Twitter, and she could get back to you on that, or start maybe a thread, and then we could kind of continue that conversation. I just wanted to point out, I don't see any other questions, but a couple of statements here. We have one from Jay Olive. She says, please understand that personal growth books and anti-Blackness books are not the same. If you're looking for true understanding, buying books by BIPOC folks are important. So that's in people of color, Black and people of color. I'm not sure what that acronym, I don't know what the I is actually, is in that one, but that's Indigenous. Shoot, thank you. It's not my day today, but yeah, that's a very important statement.
Yes, thank you very much. That is so true.
And Lynn also, Lynn Lundy writes underneath that, there exists a guide to reading and discussing the book White Fragility that most don't know about. It helps with understanding inclusivity and language. So really great points, and we'll make sure to follow up on that and get some links there too. One quick question right here by Rajab. Are you working with any accessible tool using some brain-computer interface or BCI?
There are people on our campus doing that work, yes. And we are connected with them for accessibility purposes, of course. So that is evolving. We are also looking at XR technologies, extended reality. there's a ton of cool research coming out of just Iowa State, but then also in pockets all around the world, with games and brain interfaces. So I'm kind of eager to see where that goes and develop better ways to test them for accessibility.
Do you currently have some of those systems in place at your tech lab, or is that something that you would like to extend and grow?
Not in the digital accessibility lab, but they are in other areas, in other labs.
Cool.
And I would love to
Alright.
see it grow. Yes.
Yeah, no, so basically you're saying you get paid to play games, then write about them, right?
Yes, research, double quote, air quotes. Yeah.
So is that what you tell your partner at night? Oh, I'm doing research.
I used to tell her, hey, I draw cats for a living. And people pay me for it. And now I can like make games about cats. So thank you.
Yeah, you have your PhD in cats, essentially.
Human cat interaction instead of computer. Anyway.
Computer human interaction. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions, and I definitely don't want to keep you too far over. I appreciate your time and apologize again for the slight gremlin delay. But I've been catching up when you were posting links on the sidebar, but I may have missed a few. So if you could take a look or maybe give us a link for those resources. I know you mentioned that that you would have that available as well at some point. So
yes,
any of that information would be awesome. Are you going to post maybe that link on Twitter?
I will. I might send it to you.
Okay.
If that works. And
yeah,
then
I can do that.
Twitter too. We'll just kind of do the Twitter round.
All right. I'll see you online then. Thank you again.